Hey there. Before we dive into it, I want to know where and when are you watching this? Drop your answers in the comments below and join our community. Now, get comfy, turn off the lights. Let's begin. I've stood behind the counter of the Beacon station on the corner of Elm and River for nearly 8 years. It's a place that exists outside of normal time, a liminal space between the city's frantic day and its dead-of-night silence. The air inside is a permanent cocktail of stale coffee, motor oil, and the faint, sweet chemical tang of air fresheners shaped like little pine trees. The fluorescent lights overhead don't so much illuminate as they hum, a constant, low-grade thrum that vibrates in your teeth after the first few hours. I'm small, yes, 5'2", with a frame that still gets me carded for lottery tickets. But I've learned to make myself solid, to root my feet to the linoleum and let my stillness speak for me. My partner, Leo, works the other half of the week. He's a man built like an old oak, all quiet strength and weary eyes. We've shared this schedule for 5 years, a silent partnership forged in the shared understanding of what it means to be the only person awake for miles. We don't talk much about our lives outside these walls. Our conversations are functional, clipped. Coffee's on, he'll grunt as he leaves, or busy one, I'll say as I arrive, but we watch each other's backs. He knows I keep a heavy flashlight under the counter, and I know he checks the lock on the back room 3 times before he leaves. The customers are the constellations in my small, dark sky. There's Mrs. Gable, who comes in every Friday morning like clockwork, her silver hair pinned perfectly, buying a newspaper and commenting on the weather as if we were old friends having tea. There's a group of teenagers who sometimes show up in a rattling sedan, buying cheap soda and laughing too loud, their energy a stark, jarring contrast to the quiet. They are fleeting, but the regulars, they are the fixed points. They are the reason I don't feel entirely adrift. And then there was him. He started coming in about 3 years ago, always between 1 and 2 in the morning. He drove a sensible, dark-colored sedan that was always clean, even in the dead of winter. He was a man in his late 50s maybe, with a face that seemed to be permanently set in a neutral, almost grim line. His hair was salt and pepper, cut short, and he wore a heavy navy blue wool coat no matter the season. He never browsed, never made small talk. He'd walk to the counter, place his money down, and say, "Marlboro Reds, soft pack." His voice was a low baritone, devoid of inflection, like stones dropping into a deep well. For months, I tried to crack him. A simple, "Cold night, huh?" would be met with a curt nod. A "have a good one" as he left would be swallowed by the closing door. He wasn't rude, not exactly. He was just absent. It became a silent mission of mine. I saw in his eyes a weariness that went beyond a long day, a kind of ancient sorrow that made me want, just once, to see something else there. I started preparing for his arrival, watching the clock as it crawled toward 1 a.m. The night it happened, a thick fog had rolled in off the river, blanketing the town in a damp, clinging silence. The bell above the door chimed, a soft, muffled sound, and there he was. I had his cigarettes in my hand, the pack already rung up on the register, the total glowing on the screen, $9.43. He stopped, his gaze flicking from the pack in my hand to my face. The silence stretched, and then it happened. The corner of his mouth twitched. It wasn't a full smile, but it was a seismic shift in his landscape, a crack in the permafrost. He placed a $10 bill on the counter. "You're very efficient," he said. his voice a little softer than I'd ever heard it. "I try," I said, my own smile feeling fragile. "You're a man of routine." "Routine is all that's left," he murmured, and as I handed him his change, his eyes held mine. They were pale, washed-out blue. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked, the question seeming to come from nowhere. "Working this shift, all alone. You're a small girl. It's not safe." The shift in the conversation was so sudden it felt like the floor had tilted. I told him the truth, or a version of it I told myself. I said I did sometimes, but that we had locks on the doors and a panic button that was more for show than anything else. I mentioned the county sheriff's post was just a 10-minute drive away, and that deputies often stopped in for coffee, their presence a comforting, intermittent anchor in the long night. He nodded, but his gaze was distant, looking through me at the fog-shrouded pumps outside. "I worked a station just like this," he began, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Back in the old country. Before I came here, with my wife, with my son. It was the early 90s, a different time, but the same darkness." He leaned an elbow on the counter, the wool of his coat rasping against the worn formica. "One night, I was exhausted. The kind of tired that gets into your bones. I sat down on a stool behind the counter just to rest my eyes. Just for a moment he paused, and the only sound was the hum of the ice machine in the corner, a sound I usually tuned out but now seemed unnaturally loud. When I woke up, the world was wrong. The phone was screaming, its ring shrill and insistent. It had been ringing for a long time. My manager was there, his face pale, shaking me by the shoulders, shouting my name. I was confused. I told him I was sorry, that I'd fallen asleep. His eyes found mine again, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of real fear in them, a ghost of something that had happened decades ago. He screamed back at me. He wasn't angry that I slept. He was pointing at the window, his hand shaking. "Look!" he yelled. "Just look!" I found myself holding my breath, the clerk in his story and the clerk I was, merging in the thick, quiet air. All of our motor oil, every single case, it was gone. The shelves were bare, the bay doors were open, and there were oil stains on the ground, dark slicks leading out to the road like a trail of blood. They had cleaned us out while I slept, a silent, efficient operation. They left me be. The man sleeping on the stool was no threat. He wasn't even there. He straightened up, his hand resting on the edge of the counter, his fingers drumming a slow, nervous rhythm. They didn't stop. They drove down the highway to the next station, a mile or two away. The clerk there, he wasn't asleep. He was young. He saw them. He tried to stop them. Maybe he was brave. Maybe he was stupid. He fought back. The story hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I already knew the ending. I could feel it coming like a freight train in the distance. "They stabbed him," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, which made it worse. "They left him on the floor behind his counter. He bled out before anyone found him. And then they went home. Or wherever they went. Home, I assume. They went back to their lives." He leaned forward slightly, just enough to make the space between us shrink, just enough that I could smell the cigarette smoke that had seeped into his coat over the years. "The police said it was quick. I don't know. All I know is that I slept through a robbery, and the man who stayed awake died. I never went back to that station. The owner fired me anyway, not because of the robbery, but because I fell asleep. Liability, he called it. Like my exhaustion was a crime. My wife and I moved 3 cities over. I found different work. We survived. He looked me straight in the eye, his gaze piercing, ancient. He pushed his change across the counter toward me, but I didn't move to take it. "If you ever feel your eyes getting heavy," he said, his voice barely audible. A secret meant only for me. "If you feel yourself starting to drift, you lock that door, you slide the bolt. You go into the back room and you sleep. Do you understand me? You do it. It might save your life." Then he turned and walked out, the bell chiming his departure, his figure dissolving into the thick fog outside. I stood there for a long time, the $10 bill still sitting on the counter, the change untouched. I don't work at that station anymore. I transferred to a daytime shift 6 months ago, a decision I made without quite being able to articulate why. But the night shift left its mark on me. I still think about that man in the navy coat. I wonder if he's a grandfather now, if he tells his grandkids stories, if he ever smiles a real, full smile. I remember him every night. When the last customer leaves and the street outside goes still, when the wind rattles the awning and the neon sign flickers like a heartbeat. I check the locks. I double-check the deadbolt. I check them again. I leave the lights low, not off, never completely off, but low enough that if someone looked through the glass, they might think no one was home. I don't look directly at the door anymore. I've trained myself to see it only in my peripheral vision, the way you can sense movement better at the edge of your sight. I had always prided myself on the quiet sanctuary of our home, a modest 2-story in the leafy suburbs of Elmwood, where the streets curved gently and neighbors waved from manicured lawns. It was the kind of place where doors stayed unlocked until bedtime, and the biggest worry was the occasional raccoon rummaging through the bins. That night, after a long dinner with friends, I sank into the worn cushions of the living room couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. My eyelids grew heavy, the day's fatigue pulling me under like a gentle tide. Upstairs, my husband, Tom, had already retreated to our bedroom, his snores a faint, rhythmic murmur filtering down through the vents. We'd lived here for 15 years, long enough to know every creak in the stairs, and the way the house settled into silence after midnight. I meant to join him soon, but the couch cradled me too comfortably, and sleep claimed me before I could muster the energy to climb the steps. The room dimmed as I drifted off, the lamp's light fading into the edges of my dreams. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, marking time in the hush of the house. Outside, the neighborhood slumbered under a blanket of stars, the distant hum of a car on the main road the only intrusion. I stirred once or twice, half aware of the cool draft slipping through the slightly ajar back door. We'd forgotten to latch it after letting the dog out earlier. But the warmth of the throw blanket pulled me back, and I surrendered to the depths of sleep again. It was around midnight when I woke. Not with a jolt, but with a slow unraveling of consciousness, like surfacing from deep water. My eyes fluttered open to the dim room, the lamp now switched off, leaving only the faint silver of moonlight filtering through the curtains. Something felt off. A weight in the air, thicker than the usual stillness. I blinked, trying to orient myself, my gaze drifting lazily across the familiar outlines of the coffee table and the armchair in the corner. Then I saw him. Seated in the armchair across from the couch, his form was a dark silhouette against the shadowed wall, motionless as a statue. My breath caught in my throat, a quiet hitch that seemed to echo in the silence. He was just there, watching me, his face partially obscured by the low light, but his eyes, steady, unblinking, fixed on mine. The room, once a haven, now felt constricted, the walls pressing in with an unfamiliar closeness. I sat up slowly, my heart beginning a steady drum in my chest, not yet pounding, but aware. He didn't move, didn't speak at first, just held that gaze, as if he'd been there for hours, part of the furniture. The back door, had it been open? The thought flickered, but I pushed it aside, focusing on the man's outline. Average build, dressed in plain clothes that blended into the night. No weapon visible, no dramatic flair, just presence, an intrusion that defied the safety of our quiet life. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice a whisper, testing the air between us. He shifted slightly, the chair creaking under him, a sound that sent a ripple through the stillness. His response came low, measured, like he was sharing a casual observation. "The guy upstairs," he said, nodding toward the staircase. He was sound asleep. Didn't even stir. The words hung there, simple yet laden with implication, painting a picture I didn't want to see. He'd been inside, through the back door perhaps, moving through our home while we slept, checking the upper floor, confirming Tom's vulnerability. Then he'd returned down here, chosen the armchair, and waited. For what? The question coiled in my mind, unspoken, as I glanced toward the stairs, listening for any sign of movement above. My pulse quickened now, a subtle acceleration as the reality settled. This stranger had navigated our space, assessed us like objects in a room. The moonlight caught the edge of his jaw, revealing a faint stubble, ordinary features that made the moment all the more unsettling. He leaned forward just a fraction, elbows on his knees, still watching, as if my awakening was merely a pause in his routine. I forced myself to hold his gaze, drawing on some reservoir of calm I didn't know I had. The house felt alive with unseen details, the faint scent of rain from outside, the tick of the clock growing louder in my ears. Upstairs, Tom's breathing continued its even rhythm, oblivious. I thought of the neighbors, so close yet worlds away in their own beds, the illusion of safety in our tidy suburb now fraying at the edges. "Leave," I said, the word firmer than I felt, rising from the couch with deliberate slowness, my bare feet cold against the floor. The night was thick with summer heat, the kind that clings to your skin even after the sun has set. I was sitting in my dorm room, half-heartedly flipping through a textbook, when my phone buzzed. It was her, my girlfriend Rachel. Her voice was shaky, barely above a whisper. Whispers. "I think I'm being followed," she said. I sat up, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean? Where are you?" She explained that she'd noticed a white truck tailing her as she drove home from the grocery store. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but the truck had followed her through every turn, even when she doubled back to see if it would leave. It hadn't. I tried to calm her down, telling her it was probably just some random driver, but she wasn't convinced. "It's him," she said, her voice trembling. "The Baton Rouge killer." The name sent a chill down my spine. The Baton Rouge killer had been all over the news for months, a faceless menace targeting young women, often brunettes, in affluent neighborhoods. Rachel fit the profile perfectly. She was house-sitting for her aunt in one of the wealthiest areas of town. I told her to stay on the line and keep driving. My roommate, Mark, and I grabbed our keys and headed out. We didn't have a plan, but we knew we had to do something. As we drove, Rachel's voice guided us, her fear palpable even through the phone. "He's still behind me," she said. "I can see his headlights in my rearview mirror." We caught up with her a few minutes later, falling into line behind the truck. It was surreal. There we were, 3 vehicles in a strange procession, weaving through the quiet streets. I tried to convince myself it was just some stupid prank, maybe a college kid messing around. But the tension in the air told a different story. Rachel turned into her aunt's driveway, and the truck stopped one house short. Mark and I pulled in behind her, blocking the driveway. I told her to stay in the car while I handled it. As I approached the truck, my heart pounded in my chest. The FBI profile said the killer was a white man, but when the driver's side window rolled down, I was face to face with an African-American man. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, defiance, maybe, or annoyance. "Hey man," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "you're scaring my girlfriend. Just leave, okay?" He didn't say a word, just gave me a side-eyed glance before putting the truck in gear and driving off. I watched him go, a relief washing over me. It was over. Just a misunderstanding. But as I walked back to Rachel, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The way he'd looked at me, it wasn't normal. It was like he was sizing me up, deciding whether I was a threat. A few months passed, and life went back to normal. The Baton Rouge killer was still at large, but the news cycle had moved on to other horrors. Rachel and I broke up, and I tried to forget that night. Then, one morning, I saw him again. His face was on the front page of the Baton Rouge Gazette, under a bold headline, "Breaking: Baton Rouge serial killer arrested." It was him, the man from the truck. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there in the convenience store, the newspaper trembling in my hands, as the pieces fell into place. The way he'd followed Rachel, the way he'd looked at me, the way he'd driven off, not angry, but calculating. I thought back to that night, to the way the truck had stopped just short of Rachel's aunt's house, to the way he'd stared at me through the window, his eyes cold and unreadable. I remembered the fear in Rachel's voice, the way she'd said, "It's him." And I realized with a sickening certainty that she'd been right. It wasn't just a prank. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was him, the Baton Rouge killer. And I had stood face to face with him, just inches away, and let him go. I don't know how long I stood there staring at the newspaper. The clerk behind the counter asked if I was okay, but I didn't answer. I couldn't. All I could think about was Rachel, and how close she'd come to being another headline.